Okay, here we go. Hi, I'm Dr. Brad. Welcome to the webinar, 3 Healing Secrets of Past Candida Sufferers. Put this together in light of looking backwards from what we've done with people to get them healthy. Once again, from Candida issues, there's really some common similarities with everybody that is able to go forward with the healing. And one of the biggest issues as far as healing goes is belief systems. There's a passage that I'm really familiar with. It's a biblical passage, and it talks about not being able to enter because of unbelief. There's a lot of research on belief systems and how that empowers healing. There's been symposiums, I believe it was Harvard that put one together not too long ago, where they had 3,000 papers that were submitted in their symposium on belief systems and what it does as far as healing goes. And there's some significant things with that. People that believe something is going to work, it empowers it so that it will. People that don't believe something's will work, it makes it so that nothing can be effective. And part of this presentation would be put together so that it will challenge belief systems, because most people that are suffering long term, their belief system keeps them away from the pathway of healing. So we really have to address that in a really big way. Gently address that. Another aspect of things that really hinder people from being able to go forward and heal is the idea of nutrition. Something we work with a lot is food intolerances. Food intolerances and nutritional quality are literally half of the picture of being able to heal. And this slide just lets everybody know that research proves out that malnutrition is one of the leading causes of illness all throughout the entire world. And we find the same thing with people we work with. People think they're having reoccurrences of infections and things like that. Most of the time, it's not a reoccurrence of infection, but it is it's food intolerances and people getting off of what's healthy as far as what they need to be able to eat. One of the biggest aspects of that is vegetable intake to control elimination. If vegetable intake isn't up enough to give enough fiber to have at least 2 bowel movements a day, 3 to 5 a day is normal. They just can't clear anything, and it really blocks everything up. So those are really 2 really simple practical things. And we get into really the working of everything. And this will really start to make sense. This is a slide of what the lining of the gut looks like. The lining of the gut is only 1 cell layer thick. It's no thicker than that, and it's got all these microvilli in it that you see in the top picture. And that microvilli, that's where it increases the surface volume of the gut a lot. But in between the microvilli, it's not food, it's bacteria called the flora that's there, and it's housed over the top, and it pretty well protects those. And the bacteria's interaction with the microvilli, bringing nutrients back and forth through that actually feeds us what our nutrients are, and it's really got a huge role in our life. The picture on the bottom is where there's been chronic inflammation. In this case, it's from gluten insensitivities, but there's a ton of other things that can cause this. Anything that causes inflammation in the gut will do the same thing. It makes the microvilli atrophy, and the cells thicken quite a bit. It gets full of all those kind of inflammatory byproducts, all those dark things with the white spots. Those are lymph nodes in the gut called pyrite patches. It's about half your immune system that resides in there. All that gets inflamed, and things just don't work right. Now, This reminds me of somebody that came in quite a while back. That was Eric. He had been to every single um, specialist you could possibly think of. He just didn't feel well. Nobody could get to the bottom of anything, and pretty well had exhausted all of his resources and all that. We met him at a talk. He came into our office a while later, and we figured out what's going on with him. And for the first time, um, it was obvious that we could figure out what was going on with him. And he asked on the way out, well, how long till I start to feel something different? And my wife told him, well, people typically start to feel different in a matter of a couple of days, 2 weeks at the latest. And he just looked at her shocked because he'd been with everybody for a long period of time. And really it got no results. All that happened was he went broke trying to figure out how to deal with things. And he called the office 2 days after we started with significant changes going on. He was just absolutely elated. And that's typically what we see with things. So there's a lot of things can set up. He was full of Candida. He had a host of other things going on. Anybody that's had Candida for a long period of time, that's not the primary issue. It's where it starts, but it's not the primary issue. And we got to go through what really is going on with people so you can understand why it takes a different approach to change that. If we look at this right here, this is one of the seductions of the world. It has always amazed me how big food companies like Carnation and all that can convince the population all over the world that women are not made properly. They can't properly feed their children with the way that God made them to do it, and they have a better idea. This is really what sets things up, is what's gone on with the food industry and all the reactions within the gut that come from the food industry. Any kind of inflammatory issue can set the stage for Candida, whether that's antibiotics is a huge one, steroids is a big one, stress is a really big one. 24 hours of extreme stress will make that all the microvilli just atrophy. So it's really huge. We were designed to be like this. And when we're like this, instead of an infant being subjected to all these crazy food intolerances, their mother's a huge filter for whatever she eats. It filters everything down, reduces reactivity to everything, and it's got the nutrients in it that infants were designed to really be able to use to stay healthy. So if people have a start that's not like this, they have a lot to catch up with later on in life, and that's not very easy. So we take a look at this again. This is looking at the healthy microvilli on the left, and a gut that's chronically inflamed on the right. Whenever that is the case, with all the flora supposed to be housed in between all the microvilli, and they're what's communicating with the food, they're what does a lot of the digestion. Believe it or not, the flora does a lot of detoxification. Detoxification happens in the gut wall, the flora, and in the liver. So it's a huge part of everything that goes on. And whenever there's inflammation, there's no place in the microvilli. They reduce in size. There's no place for the flora to stay. It sweeps out through the stools, and all the pathological things can go on. This is what most people think of Candida. This is a yeast form. It's pretty common. This will be early stage of a Candida infection. And in the yeast stage, it's fairly simple to deal with. It's not going to be that difficult. But once it becomes long-grained and embedded, it becomes more like this. They're looking up in a colonoscopy into the colon, and you can see the whole wall of the colon is filled with fungus. Something that's really common with this. This is somebody with severely um, uh, immune impairment, and not an uncommon thing. People like AIDS, cancer, things like that. Candida can actually morph into cancer, and it's one of the biggest causes why people die from cancer is actually from a Candida overgrowth, an infection that robs them of all their nutrients and overwhelms all their systems. This is a fungal form of Candida. Candida actually comes in four forms. It comes in a yeast, fungus. When we'll see in a little bit, it can become a fungal parasite, and mold. And there's a real problem with that I'll explain in a moment. But once the Candida gets into the other phases, it starts to pierce the body wall, and it can become systemic. That means it's in the blood. It can go everywhere in the body. It can be embedded in the brain, in the joints, in the different organs and different things like that. And it creates its toxins, and it just creates a vicious nightmare. So just because if somebody has toenail fungus or in their fingernails, that's an absolute sign that they have systemic Candida problems. Um, Women with reproductive Candida infections, depends on how long those have been. If those are long standing, it's hit the fungal stage. And circulation coming out of one's reproductive tract doesn't go in the liver, so there's no catch-all there. It can just directly go systemic. If it comes out of the gut, it's got to go through the liver first. But this is looking at a fungal body right here up in the upper right. And all these cottony, soft, hairy looking things, those are the feeding tubules called mycelia. And mycelia is a part of fungus, fungal bodies, fungal parasites, and mold. When something becomes a fungal parasite, these little feeding tubules right here, those start to pierce the body wall. And once they pierce the body wall, it becomes systemic, and parts can break off and flow through the bloodstream. In reality, the mycelia, it's made up of chitin, and chitin is impervious to the immune system. That means the immune system can't touch it. So we don't have a natural defense as far as all that goes. And the mycelia, the chitin, that's the same thing that makes up the outside shells of beetles and crickets and shrimp, things like that. When there's a fungal infection like this, it's like having thousands of cricket legs piercing your gut wall, reproductive wall, things like that. And it becomes this just leaking toxic nightmare once that happens. If we look at an idea of what the inside of the gut looks like, on the lower left over there is, you see these cells close together. And what holds them together is what's called tight junctions. When there's chronic inflammation, it's more like you see up in the top. Those junctions open up, it allows anything to get through, and they're just not a barrier. We were designed so that our absorption goes through the cell, not between them. And once there's inflammation, that's shut down, broken, and lets all kinds of things into the blood that should never be there. And all the blood supply, it flows from the gut into the liver, and it overwhelms the liver. Liver can't keep up with it and spills out and goes systemically. Oh, one of the biggest things when that happens is we get exposed to all these extra toxic things that really start to stimulate the immune system in a real negative way. The immune system can become hyperactive and not be able to keep up with everything. And we look at it from a functional standpoint. We see all the aspects of the gut here. We see the colon, we see a little bit of the small intestine, the stomach is in the middle, and to the upper left is the liver. All the purple lines is all the veins, all the veins that drain off of the entire gut drain straight into the liver. And the liver, it's got a bunch of jobs that it's set right there to take care of. It's supposed to catch and destroy all the bacteria and pathogens that leak through the gut wall. It stores all our food sources, stores proteins, fats, carbohydrates, makes sugar out of protein when we're stressed. Actually, cortisol dissolves our muscles, liberates amino acids in the liver, converts those into sugar, and that's one of the biggest mechanisms of making diabetes. It's really huge. So Candida is totally linked into diabetes. Liver's supposed to clear the body of toxins. Toxic clearance happens in two phases. Phase one makes things more toxic. Phase two adds pretty much an amino acid to it, makes it water soluble, so it can be excreted out through the bladder or into through the bowels into the toilet. The other two places where the detox pathways go on is the gut wall. It does phase one, phase two, and the flora does phase one, phase two. The flora in the colon actually determines whether we're going to excrete our toxins or recycle them. And it's really big as far as that goes. So then the liver also makes bile, and it assembles proteins. The idea of assembling proteins is not something commonly seen in the physiology texts, but if we get into some of the more ancient literature and molecular physiology, it's really clear that proteins, they come in a sequence of, like DNA. There's different molecules in different sequences, sugars and amino acids that go in different sequences to build proteins. The sequence is critical, but there's more than that determines whether the protein will be functional. How a protein folds, it completely determines its function. And then the folds, they all vibrate with this oscillation, because as the different parts of the atoms are moving around the nucleus, it creates these electromagnetic pulses that create these vibration oscillations going back and forth. And those vibration oscillations are unique to every different species on the planet. So you might have the same protein in a plant, in say a rabbit that eats those, a wolf that eats that, and a human. Everyone may have the same protein, but the way that it folds and the way that it vibrates will be uniquely different to that species. So it's a really interesting thing. And when you try and look at the common way people think that you can deal with all this is taking antifungals. Antifungals are just really toxic to liver, and the liver is already overwhelmed with what it's trying to deal with. The pharmaceutical antifungals are extremely toxic, and believe it or not, a lot of the natural ones are too. We've tested a lot of the different things that there's enzymes supposed to break chitin. Every one I've tested is toxic. You have to be really creative to be able to address this and really help people out. So we do a combination of different things that are really, really powerful, and they change because the pathogens and the Candida, they're living organisms. Those living organisms want to survive. So you change the environment and they change so they can survive, and there's a constant change of therapeutic approaches and what you're using as far as antimicrobials and things to really get people on the other side of this. This is a electron micrograph. It's one of the really fancy microscopes that's out there, a picture of the gut wall that's had chronic inflammation. As you can see, there's holes being blown in it. So that's another aspect of it leaking. Not only is it between the tight junctions, but there's literally holes blown in it. So whenever somebody's got the fungal side of things, they have fungus, they got chitin, which the immune system can't deal with. It's piercing the gut wall, it's making it leak. Liver and the rest of the body can't deal with that. It becomes a very overwhelming thing very, very quickly. When that happens, there's parts of gram-negative bacteria called LPS that leak into the bloodstream. Well, those act like super antigens, and they can create autoimmune problems. Um, Autoimmunity isn't a disease. Autoimmunity is a reaction to toxicity. And whenever anybody has autoimmune problems, it's because they're toxic. And when we really look at the reality of autoimmune function, it's a reaction to toxicity. The tissues get toxic, and the immune system tries to attack it. So whenever that happens, um, it, it it's an indication that we're not eliminating our toxins very well. And one of the big things we'll see is the secondary elimination organs that are trying to get rid of the toxins start to show all kinds of reactions. These are reactions typically from food intolerances and things like that we see on people's skin, which, good time to point this out. I've spent a significant amount of time with people doing keto and paleo and all these fad diet things. They're all full of rashes. It's amazing to see their hormones are upset. They have all kinds of internal organ problems, basically because they're intolerant to the food that they're eating, because it's not a normal diet. It's not healthy. It was never designed to be a long-term diet. Things like keto will work pretty good to reduce fat very quickly, reduce body weight, but it doesn't do it in a healthy way. And you start to see people with problems like this, and you hear things about keto crotch, things like that. Those are indications of hormonal dysregulation happening because the diet isn't really complete. And you also start to see respiratory problems. Asthma is a real common autoimmune issue in response to food intolerances and toxicity. So those resolve really quickly when you start dealing with the gut integrity, with the Candida, with the toxins and everything. And the research proves that autoimmune processes, they can stop. They can just quit once you deal with the issues going on inside of the gut. So that's really, really important. And almost every approach that's out there, all the books that are out there, all the literature, all the diets, you can't starve Candida out of your system. It's going to change, and it's going to eat basically anything. Virtually all the systems that are out there, all the protocols, all the literature, all the ideas are pretty much just dealing with the yeast form. They're not dealing with the other forms that anybody that's had it long term is really dealing with. So then we start looking at the hormone dysregulation side. There's hormones work in a very interesting way. The hypothalamus is just above the brainstem, so that's right about where the neck hits the base of the head. The hypothalamus is just above that, and it's what reads the circulating levels of hormones, gases, minerals, basically our basic life functions, and it communicates with different parts of the brain to help control those things. With hormones, most of its communication is to the pituitary, which is really, really close to the hypothalamus. And the pituitary sends out signals to the target gland to tell it how much hormone to put out. In this case, we're looking at the thyroid. The thyroid is one of the more simple of these systems, these feedback, and they call it a negative feedback loop, because the hypothalamus reads how much active thyroid hormone there is out there. And actually, I'll explain that in a moment. It reads the circulating hormone levels. It communicates, wow, you're doing great, keep it up. Or it's too much, slow down. Or it's too little, speed things up to the pituitary. The pituitary sends out a target signal to the gland. In this case, it's TSH to the thyroid. It tells the thyroid to produce a inert hormone called thyroxine. And thyroxine is converted into T4, T3, T2, and T1 in peripheral tissues, mostly in the muscle. So that conversion into T4, 3, 2, and 1 can go in a regular way, which is biologically active, or in a reversed way, which is biologically inactive. Years ago, we were working with somebody who was seeing us and seeing a medical doctor. They had overt thyroid issues. The woman was in her, I think, late 50s, mid to late 50s. She'd never cycled once in her life. Short stature, fairly round, just wisps of hair. She had a few malformations, and she's really a fun lady, a lot of personality and all that. But all those signs are classic thyroid, and the medical doctor couldn't see it because he's trying to measure the hormones. And after going back and forth with this for about a year, he finally told her, okay, you tell Dr. Brad to go ahead and give me one of his thyroid tests, and we'll order one of those. And we ordered one. The results came back, and he goes, yeah, it says it's normal. The reverse T3 on that test was almost 200 times what the regular one was. It was like 197 times what the regular thyroid was. He thought that was normal. All the reverse was completely inert. And this is one of the crazy things about lab tests and interpretation. All they do is lead to a guess, and the guess leads to some protocol that they hope they can hang on people and make them better, but it's not really addressing the issue. Dr. Reams was a genius in his day. He was a doctor from back in the 30s. He claims the best thyroid test. You wake up in the morning, grab a thermometer, shake it down so it's like below 95, stick it skin to skin in your armpit for 5 minutes before you even get out of bed and see what temperature it is. If it's below 97.6, he says you have overt thyroid problems. And that's a really good test. It lets you know how things are functioning. It's not just looking at hormones, but we need to look at cellular function to be able to tell things. Well, when we look at the thyroid, it controls metabolic rate, energy burn, weight. It's half of a woman's cycle. When women are having bleeding problems, thyroid's almost always involved. And thyroid is responsible for about 60% of the miscarriages, whether it's hyperactive or underactive. One of the interesting things about the thyroid is it's one of the most sensitive organs we have to toxins. And toxins disrupt that whole negative feedback cycle so that it's disrupted and it no longer regulates the way that it's supposed to. The adrenal is very much a companion to the thyroid. The thyroid takes care of our metabolic rate of rest. The adrenal takes care of our metabolic rate when we're stressed out. It's a primary stress gland with cortisol and a few other hormones. It controls inflammation. Inflammation is what directs immune response, so it controls that. It controls blood sugar when we're stressed out, and this is one of the primary routes of type 2 diabetes, absolutely metabolic syndrome, some of the other dysregulations that are going on. The adrenal also makes the precursors to all the sexual hormones. Pregnenolone and DHEA gets converted into progesterone. Progesterone gets converted into testosterone. Testosterone gets converted into estrogen in both men and women. We go through the same thing, and our parts are actually the same. We're a lot more similar than people really think. That's an embryological thing, though. We start off with the same parts. They migrate to different parts of the body, but they're the same tissues, and they both respond primarily to toxic estrogen. Men's prostate issues is the same thing as women's uterine issues. It's toxic estrogen that causes the problems. The adrenal, it also controls the kidneys, and it also controls posture blood pressure. So we look at the feedback loop of the adrenals. It's pretty much the same that we see with the thyroid. The hypothalamus reads what the circulating hormone levels are. It communicates with the pituitary. The pituitary sends out a target hormone called ACTH to tell the adrenal how much cortisol to put out. So when everything's working fine, that's really great. But when we're highly stressed out, what happens is the sexual precursors, the pregnenolone and DHEA, they get shunted over to make cortisol. So there's no precursors to make sexual hormones. And when people have the chronic illness, chronic stress issues, they start to have depleted sexual hormones. That creates genital atrophy and all kinds of sexual dysfunction that goes on in both men and women. This is a huge part of ED in both men and women. And women, it's pretty much ignored, and it shouldn't be. That's a different subject for a different time. I've got quite a bit on that whole concept, and it's a huge one. But anyone that's having chronic illness is going to have the same things that go on with old age. And with women, they go through a perimenopausal time and a menopausal time when their hormones decrease quite a bit. In reality, once we get older, all of our hormones are pretty much made in peripheral tissues, mostly in the body wall and the muscles. It's not made in the gonads so much anymore. And with the DHEA and pregnenolone being stolen, making into cortisol, we don't have a chance to do those, and you start to have genital atrophy, genital dysfunction, and it's more ignored in women. In men, it's fairly obvious, but both of it's an indication of toxic things going on inside, and the ability of libido, sexual ability to engage sexually and all that is a real major indicator of the health of the overall body. So when all this is going on, and we look at another aspect of chronic stress, whenever there's chronic stress, blood sugars rise. When the blood sugars rise, that makes the pancreas produce more insulin, and when it produces more insulin, it pushes all the sugars into tissues. That makes fat start to grow quite a bit, and you can be starving yourself, be chronically stressed, and be gaining weight. It's not because of calorie intake, it's because of hormones. In fact, a lot of people's weight has to do with hormonal dysfunction, not eating and not exercise. So there's about 27 different hormones in fat. Cortisol and insulin turn on a hormone called aromatase. Aromatase takes men's testosterone, turns it into toxic estrogen, takes women's estrogen, turns it into toxic estrogen and testosterone, and it starts to make both men and women start to lose the fullness in their sexual parts. Women start to lose fullness in their breasts, in their labia, their genitals, and men will start to lose penile size, testicular size. It's really a big thing. So when we look at how you balance hormones, food is it's just foundational. Everything's built off of what we eat. The gut, actually, the microflora or the microbiota in the gut, it makes every hormone that we make, it makes every neurotransmitter that we make, and that health has to be really good. If there's chronic inflammation, that's all messed up. Liver, the gut wall and the flora all do detoxification. Liver also controls some of the blood sugar through the adrenal pathways we talked about. Brain has to do with hormone dysregulation. As we'll see in a bit, the brain is really, really, really sensitive to toxins. Thyroid is 50% of an energy cycle. Adrenals is hormone, sugar, swelling, inflammatory responses. If you break anything in all of these loops, the hormones dysregulate. And finally, we got the gonads and more of the peripheral tissues, primarily the muscle, that converts the adrenal hormones into sex hormones. So if we start to look at some of that more systemically, we start to see that insulin resistance, which sets people up for diabetes, just a global reaction to hormone dysfunction, hepatotoxicity, and that's where PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, starts to come from. All that is highly tied into it. Whenever there is a inflammatory response going on in the gut and the tight junctions start to open up in the gut, there's the same type of tight junction that goes on in the blood vessels up in the head. And whenever the gut leaks, within 2 hours, the blood vessels up in the brain will start to leak. If you get head trauma or inflammatory issues going on up in the brain where the blood vessels in the brain start to leak, within 2 hours, the gut starts to leak. And that's one of the ways that those two are highly connected with doing what they do. Well, when we look at the brain is the most nutrient dependent and toxic vulnerable organ that we have. So you start to have improper diets, not feeding it properly, along with leaky gut and hormonal things going on with the toxic overloads going on. The brain becomes very, very vulnerable. And looking at this right here, this is one of the most ignored aspects of HPA dysregulation, hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis. And you got to throw the thyroid in there, the pineal gland, the pancreas, and the gonads also, because it's all part of the same thing. They're all very, very vulnerable to toxins. And whenever somebody has hormonal dysregulation, you can guarantee toxins are pretty much at the root of all that stuff. So here's a study that shows that the neurotransmitters, they're made in the gut wall. We look at one of the big toxins that comes out of the gut with Candida is acetaldehyde. Acetaldehyde is what gives wine and ale beers all their character. So people like IPAs and things like that, they're just, their taste buds really rejoice in the aldehydes that the yeast are making. Well, in us, when it creates acetaldehyde, which is one of the aldehydes Candida will make, acetaldehyde, I believe it's 7 times more toxic than formaldehyde, which is a bombing fluid. It starts to kill the neurons and make dopamine. Dopamines are a feel-good hormone, and it just makes people so they can't function very well. Then we look at another aspect of brain function. There's a huge relationship with psychological disorders and food intolerances. Food intolerances are many times bigger than actual allergies. The testing that's out there will only test 2 to 3% of the food responses in somebody, and the others, the science has no idea what they are and how to track them. Occasionally there'll be a study like this where there's a relationship between food allergy and psychological issues. Weight causes a decrease in the circulation in the brain that can create all kinds of disorders, which good time to bring up the modified elimination diet. It might be a good idea, but it's not very functional. The responses to foods can be 10 days to about 3 weeks after you take them in. And they're commonly a neurological response, not gut response. And they're often very far distant from the gut. So there's not enough to really do a linear connection between a food and a response with a 10-day to 3-week delay in response. It's distance from the gut. People can't connect the dots, and it's just not a functional way to do things. There's better ways to do it. We have our own ways of doing food intolerance testing where we can test people on their own foods, and it's really, really huge what you have to do with people, because everybody has a different food supply because they live all over the country, which we work with people all over the country. And when we start looking at some of the realities, dealing with things in a functional way with nutrition is one of the ways where it's probably the best investment that anybody can ever have. There's the WHO shows that there is a 20-to-1 return on investment in doing that in aspects of enhance quality of life and all that. We do our evaluations, so we do most of our stuff virtually now. We don't have hardly anybody come into an office anymore, and with COVID, it's been a real advantage to things. We do our evaluations in in a few different manners. We use diagnostic questionnaires, which are 95% as accurate as lab tests. We do our own lab testing here, primarily through urine. We can find a lot of very, very critical information going on inside of the body. And then we add muscle testing on top of that. And people ask, well, how do you do that with people at a distance? And the reality is, we moved a while back. People were asking us to figure out a way to be able to work with them. And I'd been blowing that off for a long period of time. And finally, it looked like the Lord was going to move us on. And we really need to figure out a way to do this. So we started testing some stuff out. We started having people in the office. We'd test them through a surrogate on the phone, and then we'd test them directly and see what the results were. And I was amazed that they were being pretty much identical. And we did that testing over quite a season. I wasn't just going to jump into something. And in the end of that, we had people, we tested them blindly. We had people get on the phone. We didn't know who they were. We didn't know what was going on with them. We had no paperwork or anything to do the testing, to do it right. We did complete evaluations with them on the phone. Then we brought them in to the office and we did complete evaluations with them. And evaluations is evaluating all their organ systems, figuring out what root issues are, how to resolve those, what other food intolerances are, so they know how to eat, what kind of water they can drink. That's really, really critical. What toxic loads are, infective issues are, autoimmune issues are going on, all that, how to address all that. We do all that with people blindly over the phone with no history, no idea who they are, and then brought them in the office with paperwork and go through the whole evaluation. And the first time we did that, we were just shocked, really shocked. I was actually quite humbled because the results were 100% the same. There was no difference in the two, and all we can really say with that is the Lord just gave us some more authority than was even my own belief system would even accept until we did all the testing, which Lord gives us a lot of really key detail issues on how to deal with things, and He gives me ways to test those to prove those out. So I'm gonna switch this to um, to somebody who we've worked with, who will tell you from his own words what it's like working with us. Let me see here. I got a So I had to turn my mic off while Eric was talking. That's pretty common experience that most people have with us. We had somebody that was traveling down the road a while ago across the country. They came in a gas station, and one of the people in the car just completely lost it, went ballistic, ripped the inside of the car up, and they called me up. Said, you got to figure out what's going on here. We cannot go an inch down the road with this. We don't know whether we got to go take this person back, abandon this idea they're going to move them back across the country. And so I asked some questions. We did some testing. We did some figuring out, and something happened in the gas station that you really wouldn't have had another way to figure this out. But the person had been exposed to some major chemical issues many, many, many years ago. A very highly toxic paint can of primer that etches paint. It actually would etch porcelain and stick on porcelain. So you're talking of really toxic stuff with a lot of acid, and it all blew up in his face. And then he got Lyme disease after that, and Candida. He had a whole bunch of things, and we'd worked with him. He went so far and moved out of the area, and anyway, he was um, not doing very well in a health standpoint. They pulled into the gas station. He wasn't driving; he was a passenger in the back seat. The driver didn't know any of the history, didn't put anything together. They pulled up to a gas station where on the other side of the pump, somebody was filling their diesel up with diesel. This person was extremely reactive to diesel. Felt like they were going into prison. It felt like the world was closing in around them, all kinds of pressure. They couldn't breathe, they couldn't think, and all they could think about was to claw out of this nightmarish hole that was closing in around them really quickly. They ripped the inside of the vehicle apart. They got away from the diesel, that calmed down. We had to figure all that stuff out before they could move down the road, and said, okay, he's not ballistic. And this wasn't a temper tantrum. This was a toxic reaction that's going on. You guys really need to be aware of what's going on with all this. And that's not an uncommon thing that we were able to find with the way that we work with things. So it's really a huge thing. So I'm gonna put an offer up here. This is an offer for a consultation. Our consultations are not generic. They're not generic at all. The address to pick up the forms is right here. There's 3 forms on this page with a pretty full explanation of what needs to go on. Those forms need to be filled out in detail and emailed back to us. Email those with 3 pictures, one of yourself, one from the front, one from the side, and one of the face. All that gives us a tremendous amount of information on what's going on with you, and then we can have a consultation on specifically what's going on with you, not a generic one at all. It's probably not like what people have experienced, not even close before. But I emboldened the detail here because it has to be in detail. There's a dietary diary in there that needs to be in detail. There's the reason why is diet has so much to do with what's going on. I said earlier, diet is 50% of of the process of healing. Food intolerances are a large part of that. Those have to be figured out. And the lab tests are not accurate. 2 to 3% accuracy. We're a lot more accurate than that. So when you look at all of this stuff, this is a pretty big offer to do that. We don't have a lot of extra space. We can't take everybody. We've only got room for a few people. And that's just one of our realities because we really spend a lot of time. So this is for people who are really serious, people who are sick and tired of being sick and tired, ready to go forward and really want to invest in changing their life. with this, I can say without reservation, we have over a 90% recovery rate of everybody we work with, whether you're talking long-term Candida. The two things we really work with is Candida and Lyme disease. And that's all I work with anymore. With that, everything pretty well ties into it. Candida is always a part of Lyme disease, and Lyme disease is not always a part of Candida, but Candida is always a part of Lyme disease. In hundreds and hundreds of cases, I don't think I've ever seen one that wasn't. Candida is either the biggest complication or the biggest predisposition or both. So it's really a big thing. But of the worst cases, and that's pretty much what we deal with, the worst cases, people that can't walk, can't talk, can't think, can't get out of bed, have no energy, just have lost their life. We have over a 90% recovery rate of those people being healthy again. And the caveat to that, the qualification is they have to be teachable, coachable, and follow instructions. If you're really serious and really want to change your life and you can follow instructions, I really encourage you to go to this website, pull out the papers, fill them out, and send them to us. Once they're complete, and I have all the information, there might be some interaction back and forth because I might need clarification. Then we'll schedule a consultation and talk specifically about what's going on with you. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you for your time.